Melchizedek, the mysterious figure who appears briefly in the Bible, leaves behind a powerful legacy that continues to intrigue theologians and scholars alike. His story is one of the most fascinating and enigmatic in the entire scripture. Who was Melchizedek, and why did the Bible devote a significant, albeit brief, passage to him? Unlike most biblical figures, Melchizedek seems to arrive out of nowhere. There are no detailed genealogies, no backstory to his reign, and no explanation of his life before or after his encounter with Abraham. His sudden appearance in Genesis 14 raises an important question. What is the significance of this king-priest, and why should we care about him today? The brief mention of Melchizedek in Genesis 14 verses 18 to 20 marks his encounter with Abraham after the latter's victory in battle. Abraham, in a gesture of gratitude, offers Melchizedek a tithe of his spoils, and Melchizedek, in turn, blesses Abraham. This exchange, while simple on the surface, carries profound theological implications that reverberate throughout the Bible. As both a king and a priest, Melchizedek represents a unique, dual role that was not common in Israel's later history. He was the king of Salem, an ancient name for Jerusalem, and at the same time, he was a priest of the Most High God, an office that, according to the Bible, was reserved for the Levites in later generations. This combination of priestly and royal authority in one figure is what makes Melchizedek so fascinating. What makes his story even more intriguing is the lack of detail regarding his ancestry or end. The Bible tells us that he was without father, without mother, without genealogy, a statement that has led many to view him as a type or foreshadowing of Christ. This mysterious nature of Melchizedek raises the possibility that he was not just a historical figure, but a divine prototype of a future priest-king who would come in the form of Jesus Christ. In fact, the New Testament book of Hebrews makes this connection explicit, stating that Jesus is a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek, Hebrews 7 verse 17. But why does this matter to us today? For many, the answer lies in the lessons we can draw from Melchizedek's life and role. Although he was a figure from a distant past, his example speaks to us about the eternal nature of Christ's priesthood, the relationship between kingship and priesthood, and the calling of believers to live lives of holiness and service. In an age where leaders often seem disconnected from their spiritual duties, Melchizedek's example offers a refreshing reminder of what true leadership looks like, a leadership that balances authority with humility, power with grace, and rule with righteousness. By examining the brief, yet powerful, story of Melchizedek, we gain insights not only into the history of Israel, but also into the nature of Christ's eternal priesthood. It challenges us to rethink what it means to be a leader, a servant, and a follower of Christ in the modern world. Through his encounter with Abraham, Melchizedek serves as a profound symbol of the perfect union between royalty and priesthood, pointing forward to Jesus, who fulfills both roles in the most complete sense. His legacy is not confined to the past, but continues to challenge and inspire us as we seek to understand our own relationship with God and how we can better serve in his kingdom. In Genesis 14, we encounter a remarkable and somewhat mysterious event involving Melchizedek, the king of Salem, and Abraham. The narrative begins with a conflict between several kings in the region of Canaan. These kings waged war against each other, and Lot, the nephew of Abraham, was taken captive along with his possessions when the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah were defeated. Upon hearing this, Abraham, with 318 of his trained men, pursued the victorious kings and defeated them in battle, rescuing Lot and his goods. After this victory, Abraham returns to the Valley of Shave, where he meets Melchizedek, the king of Salem. Melchizedek is described not only as a king, but also as a priest of the Most High God. He brings out bread and wine and blesses Abraham, saying, "Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, maker of heaven and earth," and blesses God for delivering Abraham's enemies into his hands. In response, Abraham gives Melchizedek a tenth of all the spoils of war as a gesture of honor and thanksgiving. This brief yet profound interaction between Abraham and Melchizedek stands out for several reasons. First, it introduces Melchizedek as both a king and a priest, a combination of roles that was rare in the ancient world, where the roles of king and priest were often separate. Second, Melchizedek's blessing of Abraham and the offering of bread and wine foreshadow key elements of Christian sacramental theology, particularly the connection to Christ's offering at the Last Supper. Finally, the fact that Abraham gives a tithe to Melchizedek shows respect for his priestly authority, marking Melchizedek as a figure of great significance in the biblical narrative, even though he appears without a detailed genealogy or lineage. This mysterious encounter between Abraham and Melchizedek has profound theological implications, symbolizing both the superiority of Melchizedek's priesthood and the coming of a greater priesthood through Christ. Melchizedek is one of the most enigmatic and significant figures in the Bible, and his appearance in Genesis 14 offers intriguing insights into biblical theology. His name, which means King of Righteousness, and his title as the King of Salem, believed to be Jerusalem, are both loaded with symbolic significance. What makes Melchizedek so remarkable is not just his royal and priestly status, but the mystery surrounding his origins, his priesthood, and his connection to God's plan for salvation. Unlike other figures in the Bible, Melchizedek has no recorded genealogy, no mention of his father or mother, and no clear timeline for his life. This absence of details suggests a transcendence of ordinary human categories and hints at his symbolic importance as a timeless, eternal figure. In the historical and cultural context of ancient Israel, the roles of priest and king were typically separated. Kings, such as those from the line of David, ruled over the political and military affairs of Israel, while priests, particularly those from the tribe of Levi, were tasked with performing religious duties and mediating between God and the people. However, Melchizedek transcends these divisions, being both a king and a priest of the Most High God. This dual role sets him apart from other leaders of his time and foreshadows a future Messiah who would fulfill both priestly and royal functions. In this sense, Melchizedek represents a unique blending of governance and divine worship, which would later be embodied perfectly in Jesus Christ, who is described in the New Testament as both a king and a high priest. One of the key theological implications of Melchizedek's role is his priesthood, which is presented as superior to the Levitical priesthood that would later be established through Moses and the descendants of Levi. In Genesis 14, when Melchizedek blesses Abraham, he acknowledges the divine authority of God Most High and praises him for delivering Abraham's enemies into his hands. This act of blessing highlights Melchizedek's role as an intermediary between God and man, even before the formal establishment of the Levitical priesthood. Abraham, in response, gives Melchizedek a tithe of the spoils of war, an act that signifies both respect and recognition of Melchizedek's superior spiritual authority. Melchizedek's priesthood is presented as eternal and unchanging, in stark contrast to the temporary nature of the Levitical priesthood, which was based on genealogical succession and was subject to death. This eternal quality is emphasized in the New Testament, particularly in the book of Hebrews, where Jesus is described as a high priest in the order of Melchizedek. Hebrews 7 verse 3 refers to Melchizedek as without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, suggesting that his priesthood is not bound by the limitations of time, death, or human ancestry. This timeless priesthood is a powerful foreshadowing of Christ's eternal priesthood, which, unlike the Levitical system, does not require succession because Christ's sacrifice was once for all. Additionally, Melchizedek's offering of bread and wine to Abraham is rich in theological symbolism. The bread and wine are often interpreted as symbols of sustenance, communion, and blessing. In Christian tradition, these elements are deeply connected to the Last Supper, where Jesus shares bread and wine with his disciples, symbolizing his body and blood. This connection between Melchizedek's offering and Christ's sacrifice hints at the universal and eternal nature of God's plan for redemption. Melchizedek, as a priest of God Most High, points forward to the ultimate high priest, Jesus, whose priesthood would surpass all others, offering not just temporary blessings, but eternal salvation to all humanity. The mystery surrounding Melchizedek is also part of what makes him so important. His sudden appearance, without any clear background or explanation, suggests that he represents something beyond human understanding. This ambiguity points to a divine mystery that cannot be fully grasped through human reason alone. In many ways, Melchizedek serves as a type of Christ, a figure whose priesthood and kingship transcend human limitations and prefigure the greater work of Jesus. By understanding Melchizedek's unique position in Scripture, we are invited to contemplate the nature of God's eternal plan and the way in which all Scripture points to Christ. One of the most intriguing aspects of Melchizedek's character is the mystery surrounding his genealogy, or rather, the complete absence of it. In the biblical account in Genesis 14, there is no mention of Melchizedek's parents, his lineage, or his ancestry, which sets him apart from nearly every other figure in the Bible. In a culture where genealogies were crucial for establishing authority, inheritance, and identity, especially for priests and kings, this omission is striking. In the case of the Levitical priesthood, for example, priestly duties were passed down from father to son, with clear genealogical records maintaining the purity and legitimacy of their roles. But with Melchizedek, there are no such markers. His sudden appearance and his role as both king and priest of Salem come without any explanation of his origin. This absence of genealogy is not a mere oversight. It carries deep theological significance. In Hebrews 7 verse 3, the author describes Melchizedek as without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, which suggests that his priesthood transcends the human limitations of time, birth, and death. This description echoes the idea that Melchizedek's priesthood is not bound by the typical human constraints and is, in some sense, eternal. It serves as a powerful foreshadowing of the eternal priesthood of Jesus Christ, whose priesthood is not based on a human lineage or ancestry, but on his divine calling and perfect sacrifice. The absence of a genealogy also hints at a more universal role for Melchizedek. While the Levitical priesthood was specific to the descendants of Levi, Melchizedek's priesthood is not tied to any particular ethnic group or family line. This universal aspect of his role as a priest of the Most High God implies that his ministry was not limited to one nation, but was open to all of humanity. In this way, Melchizedek's mysterious genealogy points beyond the constraints of Israel's covenant with God and anticipates the inclusive nature of Christ's redemptive work, which would extend salvation to all people, regardless of their heritage or background. Thus, Melchizedek's genealogy, or lack thereof, underscores his unique position in salvation history and emphasizes the eternal and universal nature of God's plan. Melchizedek's role in the Bible is not only mysterious, but also deeply symbolic, serving as a type of Jesus Christ, a prefiguration of the Messiah to come. The concept of a type in biblical theology refers to an Old Testament figure or event that foreshadows a greater reality fulfilled in the New Testament. Melchizedek, as both a king and a priest, fits this model perfectly, representing qualities and roles that would later be embodied in Jesus Christ. In Genesis 14, when Melchizedek blesses Abraham and receives a tithe from him, his dual role as king and priest is emphasized. This is significant because, under the Levitical system, the roles of king and priest were strictly separated. Kings ruled over the political realm, while priests served in the religious realm. Melchizedek, however, combines both roles, prefiguring Christ, who would later fulfill both priestly and kingly duties in a way that transcends any earthly system. The writer of Hebrews draws a direct connection between Melchizedek and Jesus, comparing the priesthood of Melchizedek to that of Christ. In Hebrews 7 verse 17, it states, "You are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek," indicating that Jesus' priesthood is of a different nature than the Levitical priesthood and is eternal, just like Melchizedek's. One of the key characteristics of Melchizedek's priesthood was its lack of genealogical lineage. He was without father, without mother, without genealogy, making his priesthood unique and eternal. This is a direct parallel to Jesus, whose priesthood is not based on earthly ancestry, but on his 20 divine appointment. Melchizedek's lack of beginning and end is symbolic of Christ's eternal nature as the Son of God, whose reign and priesthood have no end. Furthermore, the offering of bread and wine by Melchizedek to Abraham is a powerful symbol that points to the sacrament of communion in the New Testament. Just as Melchizedek offered sustenance to Abraham after his victory, Jesus would later offer his body and blood as sustenance for all believers, symbolized in the bread and wine of the Last Supper. The connection between Melchizedek and Jesus highlights that Melchizedek was more than just a historical figure. He was a divine symbol, prefiguring Christ's redemptive work. In this way, Melchizedek serves as a type of Jesus, a model that points to the greater reality of Christ's eternal priesthood and his saving work for all humanity. Melchizedek's mysterious presence in the Bible has always fascinated me, particularly because of the profound lessons we can draw from his life. What strikes me most is how he embodies a kind of timeless priesthood that transcends human understanding and the limits of tradition. Unlike the Levitical priests, who were bound by genealogies and rituals, Melchizedek's role seems to invite us to look beyond the structures we often rely on and focus on a more spiritual, eternal connection with God. His lack of a defined lineage and his dual role as both king and priest suggest that God's purposes and plans are often beyond the categories we set for them. For me, Melchizedek represents the idea that God's presence and blessing are not confined to a particular time or people. He was a priest of the Most High God, and yet he is not tied to the covenant that later defined Israel. In this way, his priesthood anticipates the coming of Jesus, who, like Melchizedek, offers a universal and eternal priesthood, one that is available to all people, regardless of background or heritage. This also speaks to a larger spiritual truth, the concept of faith that is not based on our own accomplishments or lineage, but on God's grace and calling. Just as Melchizedek's blessing of Abraham was not about his family background, but his position before God, our relationship with God is rooted in his grace, not our own merit. In a world that often emphasizes human achievement and ancestry, Melchizedek's story invites us to reflect on the sufficiency of God's grace and the eternal nature of his kingdom. Melchizedek's story is one that invites us to ponder the deeper mysteries of God's eternal plan. His appearance in Genesis, brief yet significant, provides profound insights into the nature of priesthood, blessing, and divine authority. As both king and priest, Melchizedek represents a unique foreshadowing of Jesus Christ, whose eternal priesthood transcends time, race, and human limitations. The connection between Melchizedek and Jesus challenges our understanding of spiritual authority, demonstrating that God's plan for salvation is not limited by earthly systems or genealogies, but is open to all who seek him. What makes Melchizedek particularly important to our faith is the way he points us toward a higher, more universal priesthood. Unlike the Levitical priests, whose role was bound by lineage and tradition, Melchizedek's priesthood is timeless and unbound by human limitations. He stands as a reminder that the blessings of God are not confined to a particular people, nation, or time. This universal approach is fully realized in Jesus, who, through his sacrifice, offers salvation to all who believe, regardless of their background. In the same way, we are called to live in the light of God's eternal covenant, where faith, not ancestry, becomes the means by which we are brought near to him. Melchizedek also challenges us to reflect on our own relationship with God. Just as Abraham recognized Melchizedek's spiritual authority and gave him a tithe, we too are called to recognize God's sovereignty in our lives and respond with gratitude, surrender, and faith. This act of tithing was not merely a financial gesture, but a spiritual recognition of the greater blessing that comes from God's presence in our lives. In a similar manner, our spiritual lives must reflect a heart of reverence, trust, and devotion to the one who blesses us beyond measure. As we reflect on Melchizedek's mysterious and profound role in the Bible, we are reminded that our faith is rooted not in our own understanding, but in God's greater plan for humanity. His priesthood, which points to the eternal priesthood of Jesus Christ, serves as a powerful reminder of the unchanging nature of God's grace and his willingness to bless all who come to him. Thank you for watching this video. I hope this exploration of Melchizedek has brought deeper insights into your understanding of God's eternal plan. If you enjoyed this content and want to learn more about biblical figures and their significance, please subscribe to our channel, like the video, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for more content, and may you continue to grow in faith and understanding. God bless.